name is Mindy Romero, and I'm the director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy, and we are at the Sol Price School of Public Policy at USC. I'm also faculty there. But we have actually our headquarters up here in Sacramento, and we do a lot of research presentations in and around the Capitol, if you haven't been to one before. So does California go far enough to ensure immigrant inclusion in our democracy? That is a big question, right? And obviously today we're not going to be talking about everything under our democracy umbrella, although very important. We're going to be focused in on access to the ballot box, right? Language access to the ballot box. This presentation is put together in partnership with the Latino Legislative Caucus and the AAPI Caucus, Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus. So we thank them very much, and I see representation here from the AAPI Caucus. Thank you. And of course, this is the 50th anniversary of Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. And if you're trying to do the math, that section, it was passed, right, in 1975. That's why we're talking about 50 years. And it protects, of course, access. It put forth mandatory requirements on language access for those that were or are limited speaking English. Now, I'm not going to give you, I could give you a lot more background on that, but our first presenter today, Jessica, actually is going to be walking us through some of that history, as that is part of her report. So I will let Jessica do better justice, I'm sure, to it as well. So we're asking, does California do enough to honor the legacy of Section 203 and to ensure that limited English proficiency immigrants who are, of course, eligible to vote, adult citizens, have equal access to registration and to the ballot box itself? Our sponsors today are the Haas Junior Fund, and we have a representative here as well, Raul, and then also the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So we thank both of them for helping make this possible and for bringing Jessica and Diego and everyone together for this event. Okay, so our research presentations, Diego Casillas, Jessica Covan, and Christina Mora. Christina, though I have to let everybody know, did have a family emergency over the weekend. Everything's fine, but she was not able to join us. So when we get to this section of our agenda, I will give you a few highlights from the press release that just went out on this brand new research and direct you to the work itself. There's lots out there with media coverage from the LA Times today. There's a report and crosstabs themselves, the press release. And I'm sure Christina will be happy afterwards to field questions, right, when she's available via email or other methods. All of the reports, as well as the bios from our speakers today, are available on our website. You can get them other places as well. We pull them together for you. So you can just snap that as a QR code. Let people grab that. The very first event on this is our events page at CID. The very first event is this event. You'll see this description. Just scroll down past the description to our presenters' names. You'll see their reports are listed under their names, including Christina's as well. And those are all live links. Their names are all live links, so you can link to their bios. And for time, we're not going to do detailed bios, but you'll have that information there. All right. Hopefully I gave you all enough of a chance here. All right. So Jessica. Jessica is the lead author on this study. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and cover the material. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Mindy. My name is Jessica Covian. I'm a PhD candidate at UCLA in the Political Science Department. And additionally, I'm a senior fellow at the UCLA Voting Rights Project. And I'm so excited to share with you this report. As many of you know, language remains a major barrier during elections in the U.S. Over 25 million U.S. residents are limited English proficient, which means that without adequate translations, many voters cannot understand ballots or their instructions. To address this barrier, Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act requires translated written and oral language assistance in covered jurisdictions. So where does Section 203 apply? It applies where there are more than 10,000 or over 5% of voting age citizens, and they also belong to a single language minority group, have depressed literacy rates, and are not proficient in English. This is based on US Census data, and covered groups include Spanish, Asian, Native American, and Alaskan Native speakers. First and foremost, having translated election materials enhances voter confidence. Language assistance promotes dignity, autonomy, and many voters feel like for the first time, they're finally able to cast a secret ballot. And an excellent example that I wanted to highlight for you all in the report was one that's provided by Anna Henderson, a trial attorney in the DOJ voting section. She describes in her anecdote, I met an elderly voter outside of a polling place in Washington state in the first election where bilingual ballots were provided. When I asked her in Spanish what she thought of the bilingual ballot, she told me with tears in her eyes that it was the first time she was able to vote on her own. That in every other election, her daughter had to go into the voting booth with her to tell her what was on the ballot. But this time, she was able to do it herself. This was a momentous occasion for this voter to do what most voters in the US take for granted: cast a secret ballot. Translated materials do not only help voter confidence, but they also strengthen election administration. For example, in Arlington County, election administrators were able to translate all election materials into Spanish for the first time and spent less than $1,200. This reduced confusion, improved communication between voters and poll workers, and overall sped the election process for everyone. Additionally, bringing on bilingual poll workers also provides a very interpersonal support the materials cannot cover alone. And many poll workers see their role as a civic duty and as a way to give back to their community. Lastly, I wanted to share an example of LA County. They go above and beyond and also link administrative officials to ethnic media and community organizations to translate additional materials. Thank you. Lastly, translated materials support culturally relevant outreach and more effective voter education. Examples of measured impact is that Spanish language radio ads increased Latino turnout by over 4 percentage points. Multilingual phone banking with bilingual volunteers has raised turnout by 2.7 percentage points. And bilingual mailers have produced a 1-point spillover effect by increasing turnout among untreated household members. So these are members that don't receive the mailers directly to themselves, but they just have conversation with someone else in their household. So overall, translated materials enhances voter confidence, strengthens election administration, and also community partnerships and trust. In the next slide, my colleague Diego will go over the turnout benefits of translated election materials.
Thank you. I want to thank not only Dr. Mindy Romero for having us here, but Jessica Covian for laying down the ground, the background on how Section 203 really works. My job really this afternoon is provide you with the findings of a scientific report that we conducted at our center that looks at the effects of Section 203 on Latino and Asian American turnout. Based on this evidence comes from the 2016 U.S. Census determinations, and we look at the turnout change between the 2016 presidential election and the 2020. So let's go ahead and look into how these Section 203 counties did during this period of time. The first thing that I want to do is I want you to visualize the reach, how much Section 203 in 2016 influenced language minority group turnout. For Spanish language coverage, there were 187 counties. A couple things that you can notice in this map. Most of the counties covered under Section 203 that were mandated by these federal provisions are concentrated in California, Texas, and Florida. The counties in blue and the counties in black, These are counties that were recertified going into coming from 2012, going into 2016, meaning that most of these counties here have been accustomed. They have been serving. They have been facilitating translated materials for a very, very long time. One thing that it's quite nice to see here, I'm not sure if you can see all the way to the back, but we have about 19 counties or 18 counties in 2016. Those are the counties in red that received Section 203 coverage for the very, very first time. So after all this time, it was nice to see that some counties outside of California, Texas, and Florida were able to receive translated election materials in Spanish. Now, the second map, I want to go to this map very quickly, not because it's not important, but in this map, what I want to show you here is the 41 counties for the Asian American languages during the 2016 U.S. Census determinations for this federal provision. Most of the counties that were required to provide language access for Asian Americans are concentrated in the state of California. A key note in this map, very quickly, is that a county, for example, a large county like Los Angeles County, may be eligible for more than one Asian American language. So these are the counties that we compare in our analysis. On the one hand, we have all these Section 203 counties, right, to compare. We compare these counties with similar counties within their own state that don't provide translated election materials, and that allows us as data scientists to measure the turnout change. So before I give you the findings, I do want to give some credit to political scientists who have published on Section 203 in the past. Why? Because they have laid the ground for young scholars like ourselves to continue to explore the effects of the effectiveness of these language provisions. We have Jones Correa 2005 study and Daniel Hopkins in 2011 that found that translated election materials have a significant and positive effect on Latino political participation. This is in Section 203 covered counties. A more recent study from Bernard Fraga, somebody who I admire, that I actually know very well, and Fraga in 2016 published a study that focused on the 2012 U.S. Census determinations, and they measured turnout effects on the 2012 presidential election. They found that Section 203 counties had a positive impact on Asian American registration and turnout. However, this particular study in that period of time didn't see a clear effect on Latino turnout. Great. So why am I here today? We wanted to know what is the current role of Section 203 in our current political environment. Particularly, our study, our scientific study, asks what is the impact of Section 203 between 2016 and 2020 based on the 2016 determinations. And here is what we find, and technically this is what you're here for. The first finding, we find that among the Section 203 covered counties between 2016 and 20, there was Latino turnout increased by more than 3 percentage points. There's an overall Latino turnout change, positive among Section 203 counties. The second finding is that among those Asian American Section 203 covered counties, these counties experience AAPA turnout, experience a 6 percentage points increase. And I have one last finding for you, and that is that among the Section 203 covered counties with higher rates of Latino naturalized citizens, right? In 2020 alone, not looking at a turnout change, but in 2020 alone, this particular group experienced almost a 20 percentage points increase in turnout. And we gotta remember, what is Section 203 as a federal policy is meant to do? It's meant to help, or it's meant to include those with limited English proficiency, those citizens, right, that don't understand English well enough to engage in the political process, participate in the political process. This finding right here sort of hits the point across. So those are the three main takeaways that you may find on the report. Section 203 works led to a significant effect on Latino turnout. AAPI turnout, the effects, 3 percentage points for Latinos, 6 percentage points for AAPI groups in Section 203 counties. And the larger effect was seen on those Section 203 counties with higher rates of Latino naturalized citizens. To these takeaways, and to move on, I'll tell you, let's protect Section 203 is proven to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much both for your presentations. Right, obviously, Section 203 and protecting access to the ballot box is very, very, very important. I'm wondering, in your study, though, right, you found that there was fairly significant increases in turnout in 2020 as compared to 2016. Though my understanding, right, is that turnout kind of by and large across the board was also higher in 2020. So how do you account for and tease out the effects of Section 203 increasing turnout as opposed to, right, perhaps other factors that impacted multiple communities increasing turnout in 2020?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is pretty common in political science to perhaps, especially in observational studies, right, when you want to perhaps make a causal claim, it is often difficult to try to isolate the treatment effect of Section 203, right? Because we have what we call in social science, we have other potential confounders, right? Competitiveness. I can think of, when you think of 2020, we can think of like partisanship turnout. You know, we know partisanship is highly correlated with both the treatment of the outcome. We are very careful when we produce these studies. For example, in our study, when you get to read a study, we control with traditional political variables that could influence, again, both the treatment at the outcome in Section 203 to try to isolate as much as we possibly can the effect of Section 203. So when we get to perhaps run regression, right, run the difference in mean, we know that we're doing the best that we possibly can to isolate the effect of Section 203.
I'll also add to that, also as political scientists, we know that you can add so many covariates, but where you get so much richness is in in-depth qualitative interviews, where there may not be the covariates in the data. You find them in the in-depth interviews, right? So in the report that I wrote, I also found a lot of anecdotal evidence of first-time voters saying that they voted because they heard that their county finally had translated materials. So that's why it's also important to look at both the qualitative and the quantitative aspect of it.
Were you able to look at California specifically and the impact of language access in California?
So for California, we wanted to do an updated nationwide study, and this is pretty much what you will see in our report. For California, what we're cooking right now is we are trying to disaggregate Asian American languages for California because, as I mentioned on my presentation, when you look at California, particularly for Asian American languages, right, a county may be eligible for more than one Asian American county. So we was thinking to answer your question, we haven't really looked into California alone, but we are working on a study that disaggregate languages, and we are planning to see whether, like, if a county has or is eligible for more than one, perhaps Asian American language cover, does it lead to later grades and turnout? But we're working on a study at the moment. We don't have anything conclusive yet for California alone.
So you guys did a lot of presentation on how the benefits of bilingual ballots and political information. I wonder if you can tell a little more about the cost, the financial cost to local campaigns, to first-time campaigns, and even also the manpower that goes behind translating this stuff and using correct translation, not just ChatGPT translated versions, right? Thank you.
Yeah, so in one of the examples that came from Arlington, Virginia, they basically did it on their own to go ahead and translate materials more than a decade ago. And from the experience of their election administrators, they spent $1,200, and they had so many benefits to that. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I think what I will add in terms of like compliance or experiences, I think that most of the studies published out there really We all go into the assumption that every jurisdiction across the United States really comply or try to do their best at translating their election materials, right, and providing translating their websites and all that kind of good stuff. So there is still a lot of interaction between political scientists or even people in the community who are really wondering whether it could be better ways to improve what it's already been serving out there.
For time, I'm going to go ahead and end Q&A now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, of course.
As I mentioned, Christina from Berkeley's IGS poll was not able to be here. Brand new poll results that were released this morning. I'm already getting major press. I'm just going to go through a couple of points that she had in her slides. I'm not giving you her whole presentation because I wouldn't do that to another researcher if I don't have full familiarity. But just to maybe give you a tease to hopefully encourage you further to check out the research. So this is part of a series of polls, of course, at the IGS at Berkeley. This is funded by the Haas Junior Fund. And Raul, Haas Junior Fund, period, right? Sole funder? Yeah, just want to make sure. A large sample is a little over 6,400. It is registered voters across California, and a large oversample of registered voters that are limited English. And it was made through weighting to be actually representative of the population. We know that. And some of the just key top lines are most California registered voters support language access. There is a partisan divide with Democrats and independents being more in favor of that, but it is, as a whole, a large majority. Limited English speakers that were surveyed are satisfied with the materials that are made available to them, and then increased language access would significantly increase voting experience, or the voting experience for limited English voters. And I'm going to just grab a couple of more points out of the press release that just went out today, just to give a little bit more flavor of life to these bullet points. So the poll finds a 70% majority of registered voters agree that eligible voters who are limited English speaking should have translated voting materials available to them in their preferred language. And the sentiment was particularly strong among voters whose dominant language was other than English. And the poll also finds that limited English-speaking voters make clear that they would use translated materials if they were available to them. A full 87% reported, I will be more likely to vote. This is a specific question. I will be more likely to vote in future elections if I have a ballot available in my preferred language. While 86% agreed, I would find voting easier if I had a ballot available to me in my preferred language. And then last, just for these points today, again, it's quite a rich poll, lots of data to go through. But satisfaction levels with the voting experience seem to reflect this desire for translated materials, while 65% of all voters reported that they were very satisfied with their voting experience in 2024. Voters who preferred to vote in another language were very satisfied at 59%, both high numbers. All right, so again, we have these available on our website. This is the same QR code. If you came a little after we started, this is the QR code that gets you to all of the reports that were released today, both from Berkeley as well as UCLA, and it gets you to the bios of our speakers. Go to the events page, just scroll down till you see our presenters' names, and you'll see the links to their reports. All right, so today's panel. Ethan, I was just looking around. Gail is on her way. Fantastic. Okay, so I'll ask our other panelists to come on up. Cha Vang, Deputy Director, Politics and Partnerships, AAPIs for Civic Empowerment Engagement Fund, and AAPIs for Civic Empowerment. Ramla Sahid, she's the Executive Director for the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans. Thank you so much for being with us, both of you. And oh, you couldn't get any better timing than that. I literally was taking a breath to say your name. Assemblywoman Pellerin, please take a seat. And of course, Assemblywoman Pellerin is District 28 for State Assembly, Chair of the Assembly Elections Committee, and if you didn't know, long-time Registrar for Santa Cruz County, and dedicated to this topic in many, many ways. Okay, so I'm going to sit myself down, and as I'm moderating, go ahead and sit down. So we're going to go ahead and jump on in. First question is for Assemblywoman Pellerin. There you go. So again, perfect timing. What does state law currently require around language access and ballots?
Well, we have a convergence of both state and federal laws when it comes to language access. And of course, we have Section 203 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which requires state and local governments to provide ballots and other election materials and languages other than English in certain circumstances. So it spells out when you do have to provide other languages. And then in addition to those federal requirements in California law, we have a requirement that requires county elections officials to provide assistance in languages other than English and other specified circumstances, depending on the number of people who have declared that they are limited English proficiency and what language they prefer to get their election materials in. And that, though the assistance that must be provided is more limited than the federal law. So there definitely is that, and those are really the bottom, like that's the least that you can do. County elections officials can always go above and beyond in providing language access as they see fit. And when I was an elections official, I often did that as well.
Thank you very much. Cha, next question is for you. It's a long one, so bear with me. What is the experience of voters using California's translated materials? How do voters use, react to translated votable ballots in their language provided under Section 203 and the Federal Voting Rights Act versus how do people react to translated facsimile ballots provided under state law?
Yeah.
Go anywhere with that to start, as you like.
Yeah, I can start by just saying, API Force is a organization working with local organization. We're an alliance of organizations that do civic engagement work year round. And one of our goals is to build a democracy that is inclusive of all our communities, that barriers are eliminated, and that we're constantly improving our systems to make sure that our communities get full access to democracy. So with that, we are actually we've been a part of a coalition, the California Language Access Work Group, also funded by Haas for the last few years. And about 2 years ago, we actually, as a coalition, had 7 listening sessions, and participants from those sessions actually found that votable ballots are much easier to use than using a translated reference ballot, and finding that I think it's frustrating and confusing when you have to you're not able to vote on the translated ballots that you're referring back and forth. In Sacramento County, actually, where I am in, uses that. Where I think the most confusing and hard part about it is that while I think what we are limited to is having the reference ballots, that is actually good, but we should also think about what more we can do to make sure that folks are able to utilize the translated materials that we are able to provide, and that votable ballots are such a key point to making sure that people feel like it's not there's not an extra layer of confusion to have to go back and forth looking for assembly seats from school board and referring back and forth from both of the ballots. And then in these listening sessions, we also the counties that do get votable ballots are really confused around how folks are actually voting with reference ballots, and also that it's definitely that we do need to make sure that we're improving how translated materials are getting out to communities, so that they feel like they are empowered to continue to vote and engage. There's another part to this question.
I'll ask that later.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on. I'm asking you a question as well. What communities are left out of the law and receive no language assistance of any kind? And what is it like for voters in those communities trying to exercise their fundamental right to vote? What barriers stand in the way?
Thank you for that question. I like to talk about it because I like to make it clear that there are communities that are entirely excluded. So federal law protects or requires coverage for languages that are Spanish, Asian languages, and Native American languages. What that means is African and MENA, or Middle Eastern, North African languages, are entirely excluded from that. And then state law is prescriptive, but also less protective, right? And so the threshold requirements that California utilizes also means that our communities are rendered completely invisible. So you could have a concentration of 3% or even 5% or even 10% of Somalis in like the mid-city area, which is like a neighborhood in San Diego. But they would be, and by law, they would be required to provide language services and reference materials and things like that. But because data is invisibilizing this community, the way census counts Arabs as sort of white. And if you're, I check the black marks, what does that mean? Right? So that means our communities aren't able to be accounted for. There's no way for us to say we meet the threshold and here's how to prove it, right? Without relying on other types of data, which, so Section 203 needs reform for that reason. And then in terms of experiences, what does it look like for folks? So in San Diego County, we were actually able to work with our lawmakers, our Board of Supervisors, and our ROV to get reference ballots for Arab and Somali speakers, for instance. And we were also able to, during the last election cycle, do exit interviews as folks exited the polling location. And what we heard is that there are many challenges, as you mentioned, right? Having to first of all, you gotta go in, there's one desk, there's a big book, right? And you're supposed to flip through that and find your reference ballot. So how complicated is that, first of all, right? And then second of all, you can't use the reference ballot to vote, so you gotta be able to reference it with the English ballot and try to mark it off. The other challenge is, like, for folks who decide not to do that, they're relying on their children, they're relying on neighbors, they're relying on people of goodwill in their community or nonprofits to help them vote. And, it's something that I think people have made clear to us. For example, in our Arab listening session, folks said they simply, one, they ask other people to help them vote, or at worst, they don't vote at all. So the quote was, some don't vote even at all, even though they're eligible to due to barriers. And personally speaking, my mom would not vote if I weren't there to help her, right? And then another listening session, people expressed a desire to have freedom and autonomy and self-determination in their ability to feel comfortable, to vote, and asking others for help seemed challenging. People don't like to ask, others for help. I mean, that's just the barrier right there. But the worst part of it is when folks shared with us that there are the technical language, voting is technical, right? And so think about refugees, folks who come from different countries who voting is a first-time exercise, and they're trying to help others vote. Sometimes you can't translate certain words, or it's difficult to translate certain concepts because it's new to them even, right? And so there's like the quality aspect of what information are folks getting when they're voting, that people felt exposed and that they just, they found it really hard. And then a high schooler shared with us that his grandma, a U.S. citizen for 20 years, is an active community leader, but doesn't vote because she worries about bothering other families for translation. So.
Well, and I just raised a really good point about the census as well, because the last time we had a census, there were a lot of changes made to address privacy concerns. And as a result, counties saw a major reduction in the languages that met that 3% threshold under the most recent determinations. And so the Secretary of State was allowed to come in and say, no, we're going to continue to provide those languages. And I know in my experience, once a county does provide translated materials in a certain language, it's really, a disservice to pull that back, because those folks still exist in your community. So whether the numbers show that you don't legally need to do it, I think that's important for you to know your own county, to know what your needs are for your area, and we got to be looking at the census data because it's really not giving us the results that we need.
That's right.
Thank you. Cha, I'm going to take us back to barriers before we move on. From your perspective, right, given what the federal law and California provides to folks in our state, what barriers still stand in the way of our immigrant communities when they go vote?
I was just going to also refer back to your comment earlier about my really very up-to-date and engaged uncle always calls me to make sure that he votes every cycle. And there's some cycles that he knows I'm busy, and he's like, I'll just go figure out the translation material. But he's always frustrated. And so every year he's like, I'll just make sure I come over when you're available and we can translate everything to me verbally. So like, I think there is a recognition that translation materials are like critical for moments where folks are want to engage and that there's actually accessible materials. But I think that because of the diversity of California, we that the translated reference ballots are actually, and the bilingual poll workers are not enough, right? There's so much more that we could be doing as a state to really balance the federal limits, and then and that, because of the federal limits that, as we had mentioned, there's some communities who get nothing, right? And the communities who do get something feel like they're being recognized, but we still need to make sure that we're covering more languages, and that we're actually expanding from just reference ballots, but actually votable ballots for everyone, and that they can vote, read the ballots, and then vote, right? Because and that we also there's also barriers to like materials that get our communities to the ballot, right? So the voter information, voter registration documents, and stuff like that. And so those are still also barriers for our communities to engage with so those are just some more barriers. I think there's also other barriers that are not related to the systems, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Pellerin, next question is for you. All right. So what is the experience? We noted that you're a former election official. Mm-hmm. What is the experience of election officials complying with the law? Are there differences in big counties versus small counties? Are there differences based on the politics of each county? Are there funding challenges? Walk us through that, please.
Yes, to all the above. So yes, so our counties are very diverse. You've got Alpine County, very small. I forget how many voters, 800 or something, very small, to Los Angeles with millions. It's like its own country, multiple language requirements. So it is really hard to do a one size fits all for folks. And that's why I really drive home the issue of knowing your county and knowing what the needs are, working with trusted messengers, working with the groups and organizations in your community that are doing really good language assistance work. And when I was the registrar in Santa Cruz County, we made the decision to provide translated, votable Spanish language ballots on our DREs. So that was a simple thing for us to do, to be able to provide that so someone could come in and vote on the electronic voting unit. And then I actually took the sample ballot that was an exact replica of the ballot and translated that into Spanish as well. So while they did have to reference it, it looked exactly the same. So it was easy to track and follow. And a lot of people vote their sample ballots and bring them into a polling site and use that as the tool to mark their official ballot. And of course, if a voter has that ballot received in the home, and they were someone that voted that and then turned that in as their official ballot, we would remake it onto an official ballot so their vote would still count. And I think it's super important. I mean, you were talking about how difficult it is to understand complicated laws and technical information when it's not the language of your birth. And so I got that early on, and we were sending out a lot of notices to voters about, your voter registration card was missing something, or a pre-primary purge card verifying that you're still living there. And all these voter notices and information were not doing a thorough job because not everybody was understanding what it was that we were asking for. So in Santa Cruz County, it was primarily Spanish needs. So every notice we sent out, I would do English on one side and Spanish on the other, so I can effectively communicate with all of our voters. And I think it's also that there's a lot that goes into translation. You've got to, the election deadlines are very unforgiving. They move very quickly, very fast. And you have to do a lot of outreach around that. You got to make sure that you're getting exact translations that are proofed and verified. I remember a story back many, many decades ago. Someone was doing I voted stickers in Vietnamese, and it actually said, I'm pregnant. And it did not say I voted. So oops, and so those were not effective, and you're not delivering that message. But I think it's, definitely making sure that things get proofed and things get printed in a timely fashion is super key. And as I said before, working with those community-based organizations, they're really crucial partners in us delivering good language materials to our communities. And the reality is that funding, this stuff is expensive to do, and elections tend to be the stepchildren of the budget, where we just don't get the funding we need to do just what we're, just the basic voter education and outreach. So doing more with less is always a challenge for local elections departments. So, and just, for example, in 2018, Los Angeles was required to provide assistance in 9 different languages. Today, they must provide assistance in 20 different languages. And Santa Clara went from 6 languages to 13, and Contra Costa went from 5 to 11. So, and a lot of these departments are working with the same staffing levels, the same budget. So they're basically being asked to do more with less. So we want to make sure that when we do provide the translated materials, that they're correct and accurate. And we do need to continue to recruit bilingual poll workers, because they are a helpful piece to have out in the voting centers or polling sites to assist voters coming in. We always made sure they had a name tag that declared what language they did speak, so people can access them easily. So, we got to be creative. We got to come up with good creative ways to make sure we're meeting the needs of our communities.
Thank you. So let's talk a moment about, this is going to be our last question, but it's each of you gets to cover it. Let's talk about funding and budgets and the reality of costs, but also the importance, obviously, of this topic and access, right, to the ballot box. So I'll start down at the other end here with Cha. How should California strike a balance between expanding access to our democracy and the difficult budget environment? Or is it about striking a balance?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Or is it not?
We'll just start by saying that democracy is worth the price, right? That we are that we have to invest in the things that we feel like are important for us. Especially, democracy is such a big part of how everybody's everyday lives are impacted. Who they vote for, how they understand ballots, how they go about voting is so important that even in budget deficits or budget hard times in budgets, I think that we actually should be courageous and continue to fight for democracy for our communities. I don't know if there's a way to balance it, but we know that if we wanted to, we can find funding for it. And I think for long term, that the investment in democracy and expanding in democracy is going to be worth more than the little pennies that we save now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it's really important to remember that our country was founded on limiting the right to vote to a small group of white male landowners, right? And that the history of our country is fighting to expand our democracy and ensure more and more people have access to the vote. And we see those rights being attacked right now, right? In our lifetime, we're seeing it in real time. Folks rolling back protections that were hard fought for us to enjoy. And California has, I think, a choice in that. We can sit back and watch as our rights are sort of rolled back, or we can take a more powerful, proactive role in this moment to ensure that voting rights is something that is not compromised for anybody, and that all Californians, regardless of LP status, enjoy the right to exercise and participate in our democracy. And protecting our democracy means everyone participates, right? Not some. And right now, I think LP status is the equivalent of, I'm going to say something maybe not so controversial in this room, a literary test, right? Weren't those laws that we sort of said that they were unconstitutional? And I think, if we relegate some of our communities to the background, that is exactly what we're doing. And the other thing I would say is California has the 5th largest world economy. Fourth now. Oh my God, thank you. Yes. So we can, that means we have a ton of money, and it's about prioritizing our values in our budget and making sure we're not debating how to balance our budget based at the expense of our democracy, because investing in our democracy means strengthening our state, strengthening our economy, and making space for growth, right? So you look at the world and you see all the countries whose economies are thriving. It's the ones with the strongest democracy. And so actually, I think the question is, do we want to invest in our economy? Do we want to invest in our growth? And if we want to do that, I think the necessary step is making sure our democracy is protected, it's invested in, and it's realized for every single Californian.
Thank you very much.
Agree 100%, and I've been banging that drum for decades. And I remember when we were doing a series of special vacancy elections, when a lot of candidates or a lot of incumbents were moving on to other offices, and counties were getting stuck with the price tag, and we fought to get reimbursement for that, because at a county level, when you're spending money on elections and that you need to do, it might take it away from your health budget or your transportation budget and other things that are needed in the community. California's current budget situation is horrible right now. The legislature is being forced to make some really tough decisions about how to balance the budget. And our situation remains very volatile because it's driven by economic uncertainty, the effects of Trump's tariffs. We've got delayed tax payments from Southern California, so we don't even know where we are revenue-wise till closer to October. And then the potential federal budget cuts and threats that we're hearing. We're really trying to navigate this in very uncharted territory. But as I said, election funding has always been a struggle. I've always been trying to, I want to do civic education again. How many people are old enough that in school we had civic education? They don't have that anymore. And that's an investment I think we need to make in our children, to plant those seeds early on about the importance of being civically engaged in your communities. So, just right now we're stretched so thin, we're just trying to maintain some core services like in-home supportive services and Meals on Wheels and childcare programs. So there's a lot happening on the budget level here. So we're just trying to fight to maintain existing services. But I look at times like these as an opportunity to expand our access to the ballot, an opportunity to make our case. And as you said, democracy is under attack now more than ever. So we have got to double down. We have got to make it a priority, and we got to make those investments before it's too late, because I fear that we're going to neglect, and then something horrible, even worse, is going to happen than what we're seeing happening now. So even in difficult budget environments like this one, it creates an opportunity to identify areas where the existing programs that don't work well, we can re-examine, and we could make some better choices for the future. So I look forward to working with all of you on that.
So yeah, I got a question. Is there any programs or a push to improve English literacy within these minority groups?
English literacy.
So English language skills. I mean, yeah, our community colleges, adult learning community centers that are located in the communities, but adult learning theory tells us that the best way people learn English is by using and practicing in real life circumstances, and no better experience to learn English than to struggle with the vote, or at work practicing your language skills. That's what adult learning theory teaches us, right? It's not sticking people in classrooms because we're not machines. We learn through experience, and I think that's what we should be encouraging.
I think regardless of any English language programs, that in moments where folks who are struggling to understand ballots, the ballots are long, complicated, and wonky, and so even if you're in programs to improve your language, English language skills, that the translated ballots are so critical. If at any moment there is a need to transition to your primary language where you understand, it's like that is actually the goal of making sure that people feel like they're comfortable in the language to vote, to vote in the language that they prefer and they understand, and it's their first language. Yeah.
Because it's so important.
Yes.
And because some people have, we have folks who have various different abilities in our language, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, people who are older, right? Like we need to create societies that welcome everybody and meet people where they are.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Delina. I come from I'm first generation, but all my older family members, they're all immigrants from Ethiopia or Eritrea, and I've helped them with going to the ballot box even when I was 8 years old, translating things to them and things like that. And I know that voting is the first step to welcoming our immigrant communities and into our California democracy and things like that. But I wonder what y'all think about what ideas that y'all have, especially for our more of our community organizers. What do y'all think that political enfranchisement look like for our immigrant communities, past just getting the vote, just building political capital and then feeling really involved? What does that look like maybe?
Well, I could say one of the things I really enjoyed doing as a county clerk registrar of voters was going to citizenship ceremonies and being there with the families and the joy of taking that oath to become a U.S. citizen, and then that next step of registering to vote was just really powerful. And I loved being out at those ceremonies, making sure that everyone who was becoming a citizen had that opportunity to get registered and to give them a little bit of information about now that you're registered, what can you look forward to, and what's the process, and how can you get assistance, and what can you look forward to seeing coming in your mail for the next election. So taking that opportunity to really do the voter education and outreach was really important as well. So that's a great place to connect.
I was going to add that as immigrant and as a refugee kid growing up, the family, actually how to involve a whole family is so critical, right? And communities around them is critical for voting. One of my first memories of voting was, so my dad passed when I was in high school, and we had his funeral in 2000 on election day. And we stopped the whole entire funeral just so that our whole family can go and vote. I was like, where's all these people going? We're in the middle of a funeral, and they're like, no, we're gonna go vote. I won't tell you who they voted for because that's the problem right there. But it is a family thing, right? So how do you actually get family to understand that, or get families to feel like they're a part of a country that is allowing them or is expanding democracy so that they feel like they're inclusive, right? So one of the biggest things, which I feel like language translation and language access is such a low-hanging fruit for us to say, hey, we actually recognize that you're a member of our country and that we have these translation materials so that you can engage. And so I always think about what is found, like how does our younger generation, because like you, as a kid, I also translated a lot of stuff. And as an adult who is politically engaged, like the information, I'm able to kind of translate it in a way where our family understands it. So who are the individuals who are in the influence in the family to be able to like pull everybody in? And how do you bring the information, the education around what politics should, how they should engage in politics? I wouldn't, I think there's this thing about like how parties engage families, but I think we stay away from that because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our communities are engaging in a way where it's true to who they are. Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that we have to remember that voting is just one part of the process, that there's a continuum of engagement that we should be encouraging and promoting and engaging folks in. One is like, you don't have to be a US citizen to go speak to your lawmakers and talk about the issues that are important to you. That there's census and how important it is for our communities to be visible and counted. And then there's redistricting, making sure that our communities are actually organized so that they can show up and make sure that they have a voice in shaping their county map, the state map, right? Our congressional districts, like that actually is really, really powerful and can shape the political trajectory of whole communities, right? And whole counties. And that's what we should be encouraging. And going back to what you said about like teaching civics in high school and like we should be normalizing that, right? And there should be closer collaboration, I think, between ROVs and nonprofits that are engaging people in this way, because that's where the power is, and that's how we can get communities who really truly feel like they are not only seen at their county, but they feel belonging and they feel heard because they have representation that reflects their priorities, and there are policies that are being proposed that reflect their priorities as a result, because they are visible, because they have a voice. And so community organizations that do civic engagement, that do organizing like AAPI Force are really, really important in our communities.
And I just want to give a shout out to Jesse Salinas. He's done a lot of civic education in his county, being the county clerk over in Yolo, and just stressing the importance of family engagement. I know, I'm a former elections official, so we talked about voting and elections in my household when my kids were, born, right? And my daughter actually, when she was in kindergarten, presented the Electoral College to her kindergarten class and explained how that worked. And I made it a requirement that when you're 18, you register and you vote in every single election in which you're eligible to vote, whether it's that special election being done locally or it's the national federal election. Every election is critically important. So even when they were in college, they had to give me proof that they got that ballot in the mail before, that their stipend came in for the month, so they were going to be hungry if they weren't going to vote. So, I think that those kinds of values are really important for parents to instill in their children as well.
Can I add one more thing?
Oh, please.
I was just going to say, there's this, I think we forget to remind a community that they don't always have to vote for every race, but it's important for them to vote, especially at the local level, that it's such a critical piece around how it directly impacts. Even though everything impacts them, they feel it the most at the local level. And I always say, school boards are so important because the young folks are impacted directly right away. And so how do you actually start organizing from family members, communities at the hyper-local so that they feel like everything else is important to engage in, right?
Hi, I just want to give a shout out to the panel and your comment about not just voting, but getting civically engaged. So we have a youth empowerment summit. We're about to have our 8th annual one. We bring in local elected officials to talk to high school students. And it's round table discussion. we've evolved it because this next year, we're going to include in the afternoon, we're going to bring in nonprofits because we want young people, even if they can't vote, to get civically engaged. So we're going to bring together this opportunity for engagement and transformation of our community through those nonprofits. So it's an exciting new evolution of this Youth Empowerment Summit, but it is. You have to be holistic in your approach. So I love the discussion, and thank you for doing this. Appreciate it.
And everyone, in case you didn't know, that was Jesse Salinas, registrar, clerk, recorder, assessor.
Many titles.
Many titles of Yolo County. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So my question is more about the translation of the actual material that gets presented to voters. Like you mentioned, sometimes, the ballot can be very technical, especially the propositions that are on there. There's millions and billions of dollars that are actually being allocated within these propositions. And even, I find myself having to further translate the Spanish version for my parents. So how do we ensure that there's comprehension within the translated ballots that are being handed out to non-English speaking voters?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we did some work with the Center for Civic Design on using plain language and readability and, getting it written correctly in English so it's understandable. And then also the voter guide was adopted, revised to have what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, which I think is really critically important for people to understand the power of that vote and what is the outcome of it, whether they're voting yes or no. So making sure we get it right and clear and in the English format, that makes it all the much better when you send it off for translation, that you get good quality information back.
And sometimes a yes vote is actually a no vote,
And then that needs to
and
be
that's
explained.
intentional, right? So going, like, for me, I think the most important document that should be translated is the votable ballot, right? That's the thing that people are going to vote. Here's why. If you come from communities like mine, people are having discussions about this all the time. They might not be talking about, like, here's who I'm voting for, here's what I think, but they're talking about the issues, and they're talking about the propositions and, like, the presidential election, right? And so there's, I think, more education that's happening that's organic in the communities, and we should actually, like, America needs to go back to that, where people are actually talking and debating issues in their communities so that they're educated and armed with the information they need, so when they go and vote, they can really vote. So I think part of it is, like, I don't know that we can solve for everything except to say, like, reiterate what you said around making sure language is really, really simple. I think third grade level, like writing, just like really simple so that it's something that then I can translate in Somali, right? Because I'm not going to be translating some legal language in English. I don't even speak that language or like that level of Somali, right? So we need really, really simple language in all translations. And I would say the most important document to translate is the votable ballot, because that's what people are going to go in and use at the voting booth.
On the note of, like, we can't do everything, right? I'm all for, like, expanding access to the ballot. I think that's really important. But I guess that also makes me think, like, how many languages is enough? Like, there's always going to be some community. Like, do we focus on, like, the major languages, for example, and, like, considering our limits and on logistics and our resources that we currently have, like, how far can we get realistically, and how much is enough? I mean, LA County does like 18, 20 languages, how much more do they need to do? They have an incredibly diverse community, right? And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, and that's where I think that when your community doesn't reach those mandated thresholds, it's important to work with your local groups and organizations that can provide some kinds of language assistance. And that's what I did in Santa Cruz County, where we just didn't have the budget to print official ballots on the official paper that had to be perfectly laid out for ballot counting. We basically were able to do a PDF version of the same. It looked the same. It just was on a piece of paper that was cheaper and easier to print. And yes, they had to use it alongside their official ballot, but it was, we never had any issues with people tracking how to vote on that official ballot using the sample ballot facsimile. and then being able to put the Spanish language ballot on the DRE, the direct recording electronic device, that was a win as well. So people could vote the whole entire ballot using just the Spanish language. So you can get creative.
I don't. I never asked that question because I was like, I always think about like, what are we not doing, right? That we should always strive to be more inclusive, and that means that if we need to include more languages, that to get our communities and make sure that everybody feels like they're part of our democracy, then let's do it. And that the question of like, where does it, the question of like, when is it enough? Isn't a question that I've ever considered, because I was like, we don't actually get anything, like the stuff that we have access to is not enough already. So our communities deserve it, and that we will continue to fight for that. And even if as we're going and we're expanding more languages, that's what we need to continue to fight for.
Thank you all for everything you've been telling us. It's been very insightful, and I personally identify with a lot of the anecdotes you've been telling us. And that the other thing, if we're thinking of democracy as access to voting, one thing is language, right? Language is one barrier, but I also think the other barrier that we haven't been talking about is immigrant communities' distrust for government and pessimism towards government because of all the different forms of violence that they've experienced. So I guess, what would you recommend to address that?
Voting. I mean,
I was going to say trusted messengers too, people who have same experiences, lived experiences that can connect with folks is really critical.
yeah, and also like access, that actually having access to the vote. Like if we can facilitate and take down barriers so that everyone feels comfortable voting, I think that more people would feel responsible also for the outcomes, right? Like if we're voting for these guys who are actually committing, like passing, like right now I'm pissed at San Diego because we have all this surveillance tech, right? But we're cutting hours to the libraries that our kids like really rely on, right? These are the choices we're making. But if we can expand access to the vote for more people, and if all the grandmas that 18-year-old at the listening session talked about who are active were voting, I think we'd see different kinds of outcomes, right? But I think in your report, it showed that, is it your report, that when San Diego County was able to give voter registration materials in like Vietnamese and Spanish, it skyrocketed. Like people, like 20% for Vietnamese voters, right? Like, so when you provide access, people use it. And so how do we actually take down more of these barriers so our communities can vote? Because more voters means our values get legislated, right? But when we're absent, that's when you see the rollback of our protections. And that's also when you see policies that are not reflective because we're absent. We're not even in the conversation.
I don't think I have that much different from what you say, but I think, engagement and actions have consequences and non-action has consequences. And so it's very understandable about the distrust in government, but also government impacts your everyday life, regardless of individuals wanting to engage or not. So how do you actually get them to see that at least they are, I run this training and I always joke with folks, it's like when you don't vote, you get Taco Bell as your best Mexican restaurant, right? And there's this like poll going around like, well, at least if you're actually engaging, even if the government is not everything that you want, that you know that you have continued to fight for what you value and ground yourself in, and that you're engaging in a system that is it's built to keep you out. It's built to really not work for you, but that you're doing everything in your power, the power that you have to make sure that your voices are heard and that you're doing what you can, right? I think that's where, that's why it's like, voting, but being out at City Hall, talking to electeds, engaging in many different ways. And I always tell my communities, like, our whole entire identity is political. However you want to engage or not engage will still impact you. So your choice is to, the choice is to really engage in a way where it's grounded in your identity, right?
And I would also recruit people to come and work with our department, to be a poll worker, to be an extra help person, to do a voter registration drive, get them involved, firsthand so they can see what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and then they become infected as well and become a lifelong voter. So that's always great to do too.
And Assemblymember Pellerin, I know you need to head out, right? Okay, so we're going to let you do so. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel. I'm working for Contra Costa County in the Outreach Department.
Thank you for coming out.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. My question is, now I'm visiting adult schools. Obviously, not all of them, they are eligible to vote, but they have kids. They have people, behind them. How important it is to provide information to them, and it is legally, from our department to give information to everybody, or the Section 203 is covering those parts, and we can keep neutral, like elections.
Yeah, you can actually, you can encourage their families to register their kids. That is not against anything. As long as you as an organization doesn't advocate for political parties, it's highly encouraged. I think access, it's, as much as the kids are access to parents are also access to kids. So how do you engage the whole family? Because it's a family, it is a family duty to engage in politics, regardless of status, that folks who are not eligible can also have influence on how elections work because they have family. A lot of our families are mixed status. And so that's the reality of it. And that if you have access and you're having education in different institutions, that is actually a pathway to really encourage the family to engage in civics or democracy. So that's not just voting, but voting is critical. And then all the other important things, right? It's adult schools have boards, right? And those boards are also elected. And then those boards make policy on the regular day. So how do you engage the whole family in those conversations?
Yeah, my name is Oscar Sandoval. I'm an advocate and a Price alum, so I'm really happy to see events like this happen here. Hopefully there's more in the future. But so I advocate for college students to get easier access to CalFresh and WIC. Our organization is based out of Chico State, but we work with every community college, UC and CSU. So you guys have been talking a lot about how getting involved is more than just voting. A big part of my job is, getting college students, getting any communities that we work with involved in advocacy days, participations on social media, sharing their story online, what have you. Do you have any other insight in terms of getting people involved into, say, a bill or demonstration or anything like that that you want to talk about or could share with us?
Sure. So how do we get folks more involved on the issues we care about? And you were working with college students. I mean, college students are the best kind of crowd to be working with because they're because I remember when I went to college, there were all these clubs and in that phase of our life that folks are really looking at ways to get involved. And so I think, if they're focused, if you're engaging them already on CalFresh and WIC and some of these other programs that are really important safety nets, right? For students and for our families, I think that's a really great jumping point to also educate them on other types of issues, like language access, I'd love to talk to you about that. And really, like, how do we get our young people to advocate for our families? Because we, you know, like a couple of people already mentioned, and we mentioned on the panel, like, we're the ones taking on the burden, right, of translating for our families, doing all this stuff. So how do we actually use that experience and those stories to advocate for things like more investments in our communities, not just for CalWorks, but language access, IHSS, childcare, all the things that are threatened but are really, really necessary for young people who may be parents and going to school or like different things like that. So I think like as much as possible, if we can be engaging folks and educating them, because you've got a really dedicated crowd, like, you know, what does political education look like in the discussions you're having with them so they can engage in creating those space for them to be more engaged on other issues.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have. I have a friend who is a professor at Chico State too, and we've been talking about what is it coming in to guest lecture. But API Force also has a summer internship where we bring the young college students in, and they get to work in different fields for in our research field and our policy teams for about 4 months, and they get to explore what that looks like. But we also have lobby days where our goal is to bring our young people, but also our organizations to the Capitol. We know that they're all across the state, and if you're not working on state policy, you never actually come to Sacramento. And most of the time, just being here is so important. I think I would highly encourage college students just to visit and walk around the swing space at the Capitol, just so that they actually are familiar with this, how the functioning of how crazy it can be inside the building. And that's the goal, where we bring our young people. We have about 4 or 5 interns this summer, or fellows, I would say fellows, and we're actually having a lobby day in August. It's a little late, but they're gonna come in and be some of our leads. And then what are some volunteer opportunities? And we have, if you all follow us on API Force EF on Facebook, Instagram, and our website, we have volunteer opportunities. Our capacity director, she regularly meets up with them and have conversations around what does the engagement look like. And college is the right age for folks to engage. And I don't know, like during the VCA, the Voters' Choice Act implementation, Sacramento State was one of the voting sites. And so it was actually a very important site to have, because that line was so long and the excitement of the young people to be able to vote on site while they're on campus was so important in learning about what is it to just go out and fully participate, right? And so besides, I think just follow us, and then we can connect too. Yeah, we have different opportunities.
Thank you both. We are actually at time, so I don't know, Christine. Okay, we're good. So again, our panelists have a few minutes at least afterwards to engage. So I think I had 2 hands that didn't get answered, didn't get to ask their question. So don't be shy. Come on up if you want to ask directly. Thank you, everyone, again for attending. Again, recording will be available soon. For those of you that may have arrived late, that'll get you to our website, get you to the reports and poll data that was released today, get you bios from our panelists and presenters, and that's also where you can find the slides, which will be released or posted tomorrow. And then if you're on our mailing list, you will also get the recording that you can share, hopefully share with others. And the last but not least, I want to thank Haas Junior Fund very much for bringing us all together. For supporting the research, for supporting this day, right, and this conversation. And this was a really robust conversation, really great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for engaging. And I hope we are going to continue the conversation with all of you going forward. Thank you very much.